Thanks, Joe, for pressing record, and hopefully, Ben, you are here.
We do have Ben, but I think Teams may be being a bit funny this morning. So
it is a little glitchy, and we've still got people joining in the lobby too. So just bear with us. Teams is just warming up, I reckon, and that is coffee.
Hello, Joe, Sam. I'm here and ready to go. I'm just putting slides. Oh, I was just putting slides up on screen, but
we can hear you and I can see you, Ben. That is great news.
That's good.
So yeah,
let me just get my slides on screen for people to see. I know some people have had glitches in Teams recently, and that's affected presentations, but hopefully this is now, fingers crossed, coming up while the slides are loading. There we go. Firstly, welcome to everyone, and thanks for making the time to join this. For those of you who don't know me or have just joined, Ben Bryant, I'm one of the directors at ISOS Partnership. We're an independent research and advisory organisation, but we are, importantly for today's conversation, one of the partners within the RISE consortium, which, for those of you who may have come across us before, but it stands for Research and Improvement for SEND Excellence, and we're obviously partners in that endeavour with the Council for Disabled Children, as well as the Universities of Warwick and Birmingham, and the National Development Team for Inclusion. Within the What Works in SEND programme, our work, the work that we particularly have focused on, is this thing that Anna has described, the effective practice evidence framework. And what I'm going to talk to you about today is three things. One, kind of what that is, just looking at the poll findings. I reckon about half of the audience, you may have some familiarity with this. Some of the resources you've accessed through What Works in SEND may include going onto the What Works in SEND website and looking at our effective practice section of that. That's kind of what I'm going to talk about today. But for the other half, hopefully this is a bit of an introduction and maybe a sort of a plug to go and have a look at those resources and see if they're useful. But I'm going to talk about the framework, what it is and how it works. I'm going to talk a little bit about the case studies that we've developed and published on the website and how we've gone about doing that, and a little bit about kind of what we've learned. But very much I'm going to try and set up the two later conversations, which I think will be much more interesting in a substantive sense in terms of the work that Hertfordshire have done that we featured as a case study, and then the work that North Tyneside have done that Parady is going to talk about. So that's the kind of second thing. And then very briefly, I'm just going to talk about one other aspect which we've been sort of testing out and piloting this year, which is essentially how we take the learning from those case studies and begin to think about how we put them into practice. And I'm going to talk about something very grand that we've called our learning communities. So let me jump into it. I know we've got about sort of 20 minutes for this section. I'm hoping this is just a very brief kind of run through and introduction. You've heard a little bit about what Works in SEND is and who's involved in it, but I guess just to say a little bit about the effective practice evidence framework. So there are a number of sources of evidence that we look at in terms of building that evidence base around what works in SEND and local SEND systems in England. The role of the effective practice evidence framework, essentially what we designed it to do, was to be a methodology of capturing, validating and presenting evidence of effective practice that is drawn from the work of individual local SEND systems. So local areas and the kind of systemic interactions, partnerships, practices that take place within them. Essentially, the effective practice evidence framework is a methodology of capturing that evidence, and it complements some of the other forms of evidence that we use within What Works in SEND, including some of the work that's done either reviewing existing academic evidence or other kind of studies, or indeed undertaking primary research. So effective practice evidence framework, how do we capture kind of examples of what works from local SEND systems? And we do this by looking at a range of areas. We developed this slide right at the start of the process. Essentially how this is used is when you see a case study on the website, we try and tag it in terms of what area of a local SEND system it may be relevant to. And essentially what this slide kind of gets across is that the effective practice evidence framework encompasses pretty much every aspect you can imagine of a local SEND system. So it goes right across the kind of continuum of support in terms of kind of universal targeted specialist provision. It goes right across the age range from birth, children in early years, school age, right through into kind of post-16 and early adulthood. It goes across different agencies, so kind of education, health and care. We've looked at and got case studies on all of those. And it looks at a range of, if you like, kind of strategic elements of a local SEND system in terms of partnership working or co-production, or how we look at the kind of impact on lived experiences or information and communication. So essentially, it kind of looks at everything. I mentioned that the effective practice evidence framework is, in its essence, a kind of a methodology for capturing evidence. And there's two ways in which we do this, two, I guess, broad tools. So one is a set of evidence standards, which is essentially kind of our criteria for considering which case studies should be published as part of the effective practice evidence framework. And there are three standards that we require case studies, examples of practice, to meet in order to kind of work with them to develop. And then a slide that we've used the word project here. We've put it in inverted commas for quite deliberate reasons. Obviously, when we're coming and working on a case study, we're kind of asking about, what's the beginning, what's the end, what's been the impact, as if it's a kind of self-contained piece of work. And we recognise that obviously that is not the case, that often we are talking about a window onto a piece of work that has been ongoing for a long period of time and is very much part of, business as usual or ongoing work within a local area. But in a sense, we've used some of the language and trappings of projects to set our evidence standards. So the evidence standards are first the aim, so there has to be a clear and specific aim in terms of improving an aspect of the local SEND system and how it works, or the experience and support for young people and families. And crucially, that aim has to be we have to be able to articulate that as something that we could track. So there has to be a way that we can say, where are we now? What's the kind of baseline or starting point? And where do we expect to get through this work? So we expect to see evidence of a clear aim and kind of baseline. Then, kind of understandably, we expect to see evidence of impact. And obviously, with the nature of the kind of projects that we work on and the nature of kind of local SEND systems, exactly what that evidence of impact is and how it might be captured will differ from project to project, from case study to case study. But generally, our sort of rule is we want there to be some form of quantitative evidence, so we can quantify distance travelled impact from the starting point, the aim, to where we are now. And it's worth saying that when we publish case studies, these aren't kind of set in stone. We've actually gone back over some of the first batch of case studies that we developed when we launched the framework, and updated that in light of any new work that's been done and any new impact that's been gathered. So it is designed to be a kind of live process. But we do want to see that kind of thread from what were we trying to achieve when we started, and where are we now, and how can we capture that? But that will always generally be a balance between quantitative and qualitative, but we do want to see both. And then the third evidence standard is around sustainability. In a sense, the reason this is an evidence standard is because time, resources, capacity are in short supply in local areas, local SEND systems. Projects that are not worthwhile tend to be kind of tested out and then discarded if they're not achieving anything worthwhile. So the fact that a piece of work has been tested, developed, and has been sustained, we see as good evidence that clearly local leaders and local partners think it is worthwhile. So those are the three standards that we have. That's one part of the methodology for the framework. And then the second part, and I thought it was worth illustrating this. When you go on the What Works in SEND website and you go to the effective practice tab there, you'll see these little thumbnails of case studies. And the bit that I've highlighted with the sort of red dotted line is when we publish a case study. And these happen to be two of the most recent case studies we published, but they also happen to be the ones that you're going to hear about today. We have these sort of two little sort of signal strength indicators. And essentially what they are trying to do is show two things. One, how strong the evidence is behind the case study, and then 2, how broad the impact is. And when we work on a case study, this is the sort of final piece of the jigsaw that we put together before we publish. So just to explain those signal strength indicators in terms of what they're telling you if you go to the website and are looking at a particular case study. So strength of evidence, first of all. Essentially, this is saying kind of what is the nature of the evidence that sits behind this? And there are 2 dimensions to this. Essentially, the first dimension looks at how this has been evaluated and validated. So whether this was a kind of internal evaluation that's been done within a local area, or whether there's kind of any independent or external validation of that. And you can see the scale as it moves from emerging, promising, good, robust, and the signal strength indicators increase. And the other dimension is kind of linked to the evidence standard around sustainability. Essentially, how long has this been in place for? So in a sense, you may have a project that has been evaluated internally, which would be on the left-hand side, on the kind of first dimension, the level around emerging. But actually, if that's been in place for many years, actually that's going to be slightly stronger. And we try and find a kind of a best fit, as it were, between those 2 dimensions. So when you look at a case study and you see that first signal strength indicator in terms of the strength of evidence, that's what it's telling you. Essentially, how has it been evaluated and how long has it been in place? And then the second signal strength indicator that we look at, it's the same scale, but it works slightly differently. So essentially what we have here are 4 sort of areas of impact, as it were. And there's no hierarchy between these. It's essentially a kind of a cumulative, a totting up process. So if, when we're working on the case study, there is evidence of impact in 2 of these areas, this would be at the level of promising. That's the signal strength indicator we would give. If it was good, there'd be 3 areas. And the areas, just to kind of explain, are, and to take a kind of anonymized example of a project that we've worked on in the early years, a piece of work designed to kind of support inclusion and transition to school for children who need additional support in the early years. If there's positive feedback from parents and carers, for example, about the confidence that's given, their understanding of their child, how they can support them, their experience in a preschool setting, that would tick that first point A in terms of area of impact. If we could also show that there was impact in terms of children's developmental milestones and the proportion of children supported in that way who are making a successful transition to school, that would be a kind of second area of impact. So that would kind of push it up to promising. If we also had examples from practitioners saying, yes, this has been revolutionary to our practice and helped us to understand and support children in a new way, that would push it up further. And if we could demonstrate not only the kind of impact then and there, but actually that those children have a better trajectory when they get into key stage 2 and they move it to the end of primary and indeed beyond that, that would be the sort of the 4th area of impact in terms of kind of long-term outcomes. So there's no hierarchy, it's just a kind of cumulative process. And just to sort of explain what the framework likes, there's a screen grab in terms of what you see when you go on to What Works in SEND and click on effective practice. You see these little thumbnails of the case studies and you can see the signal strength indicators, and there is a way of kind of searching by different themes or by levels of signal strength indicators there. There's also just a kind of small plug here, which is there is a link on the website. If you have an example of practice that you think actually is brilliant and we should be working with you to kind of highlight, there is a link in terms of putting in a small expression of interest. Just to explain a little bit more about the kind of second item of this presentation, so kind of what happens when we find a potential example of good practice. How do we do it? And I'll run through this very quickly. We started off with a very detailed kind of form that we asked people to fill in and write all sorts of things down, and we just found that didn't work at all. Partly it was extra work for local areas, and partly we found that we kind of, as we read things through, not that the information wasn't good, but it kind of piqued our curiosity, and we had kind of questions about the kind of how does this look on paper, but what's the kind of magic ingredient that actually really makes this work? And we just found that actually having a dialogue about the work was beneficial to us because it allowed us to probe and understand the sort of the nuances of how a piece of work had been developed and how it functioned. But also, as you can see from the quote that we've put there, we actually found that the people working with us said, actually, it's really useful to have the space to kind of stand back from the day job and reflect and talk through what we're doing. And in the process of that, and in the process of working through the sorts of questions that we asked to develop a case study and thinking about the evidence standards and the signal strength indicators, it actually helps us to reflect on what we've got in place and what we might need to develop. So colleagues have found this process a useful and valuable and developmental process. And I think the key thing to say here is it's iterative, but we, the team of us within ISOS Partnership and Council for Disabled Children, we do the work. So we come and have a couple of kind of workshops where we trying to draw out the information, we have a dialogue with you, we take that away, we try and write something that captures what the case study is about, we share that, we make sure we agree that, we add bits to it. When a local area that we're working with is happy, we then have a process of moderation where we take that to a small pool of independent reviewers who have either lived or practice experience of the local SEND system. They review our evidence standards and our signal strength indicators before we publish. And one thing we've done this year, which I think is a really important addition, is as part of that review and moderation, we've started to build up a small cadre of what they themselves have decided to call young experts. So we've got a group of young people who essentially read our case studies from the perspective of children and young people and give us feedback in terms of what they like and what they think is powerful, and their advice in terms of, for local leaders taking the work forward, what they think would be most useful as a next step. We've just started kind of doing that this year, and partly we publish that kind of that sort of youth voice piece as part of the case studies, but we also provide that as feedback to the local areas with whom we work. The next slide just provides a very, very brief sort of summary of what we're working on at the moment, but also, I guess, sort of highlight some of the themes of case studies that we've published already. And you'll see a number, you're going to hear about North Tyne and their work around kind of early identification support in the early years. We know this is a topical issue, not just because of potential reforms of the SEND system, but obviously best start in life. And there are a number of other case studies from Hertfordshire or Wandsworth on the framework to look at there. There's a lot of work around youth voice, and I'm going to say a little bit more about that and how we've tried to kind of take that and put that into practice in the final bit of the presentation in a minute. But you will see, if you're interested in kind of thinking about youth voice and youth participation, there are some brilliant case studies from the Multi Schools Council in Essex, from Lincolnshire Young Voices, from the Atlas Group in Surrey, from Dorset. There's a wealth of material there. And then, just to kind of highlight this for later, I think you're going to hear from Erin about the work in Hertfordshire, but we have done some slightly larger case studies. Hertfordshire was the first one that we worked with on this, about kind of whole system improvement. And again, there's a really nice case study to read, and you'll hear about that in a moment. I guess just a word about kind of why this matters, because we're all thinking the kind of the R word, reform. We're all thinking about white paper. We've all got kind of hearing rumours about when it will or won't be published. I think it's worth just saying, in the context of that kind of anticipation of reform, why these case studies are important. We very much see the work in these 6 areas as being foundational practices to any national SEND system. The work around, how we think about and identify and provide additional support for children in the early years, how we hear the voices of parents and carers and involve them in co-producing solutions, young people, how we think about the role of the whole system. These are foundational practices, whatever the national framework is, and however good or bad we think national reform may be, it's not going to prescribe all of these elements. There will still be day-to-day interactions, practices that will be needed. And I think, secondly, these sorts of practices also begin to kind of point the way, as it were, in terms of where there is evidence of approaches that are in line with or can inform what we think the national agenda may be. So we would argue very strongly that these are crucial to be thinking about, even in the context of national reform. And just reading through some of the kind of case studies that we've done recently, and just thinking about kind of what this tells us, I think they really underscore in so many ways and you'll hear about this specifically from Erin and from Parady, the importance of relationships and kind of co-production. I think that's been a theme in every successful case study we've done. It's very easy to throw those words around, but in working in a genuine partnership approach with partners to shape a particular initiative, ensure it's understood, tweak it, refine it so it achieves what you're intending it to achieve. It may sound glib, but I think it's not a coincidence that's come through all of the case studies that we've done. I think secondly, and this is particularly crucial, I think in terms of the North Tyneside case study that you're going to hear about, the importance of having a kind of an ear and an eye to the ground in terms of spotting trends, changes, and the implications of that for the local system and the support that's offered, and being able to kind of marshal a whole system response. I think that comes through very strongly. And I think the third thing, and I don't know, we haven't compared notes yet, but I think in the presentation that Erin's going to give on Hertfordshire's work, one of the things that struck me when we worked on that case study was the power of thinking about SEND not as this kind of separate thing and almost a kind of separate subgroup of children and young people that has its own system and its own services, and all the other services kind of work with non-SEND children. But actually what was really powerful about that, and a number of the case studies that we've worked on, is the idea that actually across education, health and care, across all different types of settings, there will be children who need additional support at different times, and actually inclusion SEND is everyone's responsibility, and how we can make that real. So that's the kind of what we're working on. And very briefly, I'm conscious of time, just a word about how we're starting to put sort of the case studies that we've worked on into practice. We're very conscious, and that poll earlier, Anna, was useful. We're conscious that we can put this material out, but actually, how is it helping? How is it being used? And we wanted to test something this year where we took a particular theme and wanted to say, well, how can we help in real time this influence practice? So we created this model of sort of learning communities, and we picked the theme of youth voice because we felt youth voice, youth participation was, as I say, foundational to the practice of local systems. It's something that's kind of, I don't think anyone would disagree is a kind of positive thing to be doing and working on, and crucially didn't feel like it was dependent on national reforms. So we put out an expression of interest last spring. We had a number of responses back. We picked 8 local areas that we thought we would like to work with and divided them into 2 parallel cohorts. And essentially we've had a kind of an iterative set of engagements across the autumn term and the spring term, monthly engagements, individual catch-ups and kind of group workshops, sharing practice, feeding in some of the knowledge and insights from our case studies, sometimes hearing directly from young people or from the organisations that represent them in real time. And without sort of giving away too many secrets, we have a big learning event in a month's time. We're going to be pulling together a kind of a resource, a kind of extended case study that captures the learning from that. So do watch this space if this is something that you are thinking about or working on or interested in. But just the final slide I've got up here is just a set of the questions that we've been looking at through this work about what's the best way to reach young people and build a network. How do you balance that with having a kind of a more formal strategic group? And if you do, what's the relationship between the two and who's representing whom? What role do adults and leaders play in terms of supporting those groups? And how do you get beyond a kind of, let's have some young people voice because it's a good thing and it kind of makes us all feel better, to something that is actually meaningful and shapes the local system and actually influences decision making. So final slide, just a kind of brief reminder of what I've talked about. There's the link to the What Works in SEND website, there's the link to the case studies, and again, if you've got an example of effective practice that you think kind of would be of interest and fits with what we're working on, we are more than happy to hear from you and we'll be keen to kind of start a discussion. So we've put the link to that there. I will stop sharing now, and I think we've got a little bit of time for questions. I'm happy to answer any if there are.
We absolutely have time. Thank you, Ben. Yeah, so any questions, it would be great if you do pop your hand up and come off mute, or pop it in the chat. We'll keep an eye on the chat. But yeah, any questions, reflections for Ben? Anyone kind of feeling brave and bold and think that you do something that you want us to explore and develop a case study, please tell us. Because I think often you might not understand quite how innovative the bit of work that you're doing is, but but we've seen so much innovative stuff and all those case studies. Kerry, come in.
Hiya, just a thought while listening to you there. How are we dealing with families who maybe don't have a voice, who are marginalised, or how are we reflecting intersectionality into all of this stuff while thinking around that, so that actually we do get a real rounded view around SEND? And then obviously, while working with Parent Carer Forum strategically, how are we ensuring that we are taking that forward and reflecting that feedback coming through, so the living experience that we're reporting on is actually going back into them communities and feeling valued?
Thanks, Kerry.
I guess it's worth saying that we, in our role, and I say we in terms of ISOS partnership and CDC, so as RISE, we are drawing on the evidence of local areas. So we're not doing sort of primary research. We're not going and gathering feedback off our own back, as it were. We are working on examples of practice that we think has an evidence base that meets our evidence standards. So I guess that's just worth saying kind of off the bat. I think within some of the case studies that we've worked with, particularly around youth voice and work with parents and carers, we've been particularly interested in how groups that are seeking to capture the voice of young people and or parents and carers do that in a way that does capture not just those who are willing to kind of come forward and are very keen to kind of have their voices heard and are in a position to make their voices heard, but equally how we reach those who perhaps may need more support, or we may need to take a more proactive approach. And without going into kind of too much detail, there are examples, I think, particularly in Wiltshire, in Rotherham, in the Haringey case studies, which are all about co-production with parents and carers, which speak to that. Likewise, our work on the youth voice learning communities and some of the case studies that we've got there very much speak to how do we make sure that there are young people who, if they are interested and willing to sort of act in a much more kind of active way, how do we support that? But equally, how do we make sure that we are not taking that voice as a representative of the whole community of children and young people, and we hear the voices of those? And I guess just to give you an example, I won't embarrass the local area by name because it's not fair to do so, but one of the local areas, or a couple of local areas actually, that are part of our youth voice learning communities, one of the things that I think they're doing that's really powerful is pioneering a role of a young researcher, so training young people to go and be advocates, to go into schools or youth groups or settings, in places where young people are, and have conversations with them in a way that's appropriate for them to communicate. So it's not just those who are feeling confident and feel happy to articulate their views in a kind of group setting, and bringing that kind of wealth of knowledge back. And there are a range of ways that is done. We're interested through this work about capturing that work. We're not obviously in a position to go and do that work in local areas themselves, but there are some real insights, I think, from some of the case studies that we've got that are doing that. I hope that answers the question, Kerry. Tell me if it doesn't.
It's just that obviously I'm really interested in that from our perspective in our forum around parents who maybe have their own needs and learning disabilities interacting in this process. So as we are going forward, obviously when you're thinking about intersectionality and all that, there's so many different ways of cutting through that to make sure families' voices are represented in the change. Because actually, if we haven't got them representation, then how can we ensure that the impact we're looking for, which is to be thriving for young people for the future, how can we ensure that these changes will be appropriate? That's where I'm going. But yeah, you did answer my question. Thank you.
Thanks, Kerry. And thanks for the reminder of such an important perspective and lens that we have to shine in all of the work. So I appreciate you raising that. Got a couple of hands up. So Debbie first, and then we'll come to Nicola.
Yeah, thank you. So I've already been exploring the effective practice resources. I've used them quite a number of times, and it's great to hear how the framework is sort of developed a little bit more. So from my perspective, what I wanted to just say, it's more of a comment along with a bit of a question, is I can see some really strong potential of using the framework with local areas as a sort of a tool that can support evidence and impact. So when you were talking about the different layers in the framework, I think that could be really useful for local areas as they particularly preparing for SEND inspections. And I just wondered whether there were any plans to develop the guidance on how local areas might use that more widely, I suppose, with sort of self-evaluation, assessment of impact, because I think this is like huge. It's brilliant work, and there's got so many opportunities there to utilise it further. So it's a comment with a bit of a question as well as.
Thanks, Debbie. Ben, do you want to come in?
I'll be really brief because I don't think we've got one more question from
Okay.
Nicola as well. I guess so. So this is very much part of our thinking, Debbie. And when we launched the framework a couple of years back, we did at the time publish, which is probably now somewhere deep down in the depths of the What Works in SEND website, but we did publish a very short resource about if you're thinking about a project when you're starting it or when you're kind of part way through, but like using the evidence standards and the way that we think about kind of evaluation, sustainability, and different sort of areas of impact, how to use that when planning a piece of work. So you don't have the kind of classic thing of, here's an initiative, let's start it because it feels like it's the right thing to do and we need to do something, and then kind of getting a year or two down the line and thinking, how do we evaluate this? And actually, like, we would have planned it differently had we made those plans in terms of evaluation and evidence capture at the start. So that is we did do that, and that is there. I guess we've also been quite cautious not to kind of muddy the waters too much in terms of obviously local areas preparing for Ofsted inspection and thinking about what they need to do. And we know, there's all sorts of self-assessment frameworks that are now coming out in anticipation of reform. So we've been cautious about that, but that is there. And we have, as I say, very much use that framework, particularly when we're working with local areas to develop case studies, as a kind of frame for thinking about their work. And again, I'm not trying to kind of blow anyone's trumpet, but I think the reason we changed our approach from what was quite a kind of paper-based and probably quite kind of cumbersome and bureaucratic process to start with to a more dialogue-based approach was actually people said this is, this is helpful in helping me stand back and try and tell the story. B, it's helpful to have us as ISOS Partnership or CDC as outsiders kind of understand and reflect back. Here's what we've taken from this, and is this something you recognise? And I think C, they found it useful because in thinking about those kind of areas of impact, for example, you think, oh, well, this piece of work we've been doing, we've really focused on getting impact in this area, but actually we've not answered the question about, what happens to the young people or the families that we're working with 2 years, 3 years, 5 years down the line. So in a sense, yes, it's very much in line with our thinking, but we just wanted to be quite cautious about not pushing that too much, because each of those products serves a slightly different purpose, and we don't want to sort of overwhelm people or confuse them. But it is very much part of the way that we work.
Thanks, Ben. Okay, last question from Nicola, and then we'll hear from Erin. And Ben, there was a question further up in the chat, if you wouldn't mind answering that in the chat, and then and Nicola, you come and tell us what your question is.
Hi, thank you. Well, actually, it was talking about moving on from what Kerry was saying about families. In our role and in our trust, we work with a lot of families and give them support for their children, but identify that a lot of them have their own learning needs and need support with that. And in our role, that we're only a very small team, but I did a bit of research as part of a master's that I was doing, and identified some of the needs of our families, because our children are like, they're 0 to 5, and often the parents haven't even identified their own neurodivergent need anyway. And from that, we're working on something to go forward with. And I suppose it's just about how would I get support? I'm thinking about using the framework, because obviously I've done the research, but obviously I don't think it's like big enough. But my the people that I interviewed, I didn't have a lot of people. I had a short time to do it in and everything, but it still identified some really important information for us, and it's helped us improve our service, definitely. And we're implementing some things to include that. And I suppose my question is, using that, could I still use that framework moving forward? And would it be something that you could support with, or is it something that we use independently? Sorry, that's really rubbish question.
No, I think we got that. Ben, do you want to?
No, not at all. I mean, I think I think it's worth saying that the role that we have in terms of sort of as a custodian of the framework is very much in terms of where there are examples of good practice and where there's evidence of them, capturing that and presenting that and publishing it on the website. So in a sense, the work needs to have happened and there to be at least some early evidence of that, even if that may develop and we may update it over time. But certainly the resources, and I think Parady's put the link to it in the chat, the resources and the kind of the framework itself as a kind of idea is certainly something that is there for people to use if it's helpful in terms of thinking about your work. So yeah, I hope that's not too much of a kind of politician's answer. I mean, yes, if you know, in a sense, if you've got to the point where there's evidence of the work that's happened and you think it meets the evidence standards, by all means put in an expression of interest and we can look at that. But that's the point where the work that we do kind of comes, because it's about capturing and then presenting and validating the evidence rather than developmentally working with you at an earlier stage.
I understand. I think what it is it's like doing the research. I've identified that actually, whilst we are doing everything we can to support our children that have a SEND, if we're not supporting the family that may also have their own needs, then all that support is not necessarily wasted, but not being utilised to its best ability, because we're not meeting the needs of those parents and carers. And that's where I think I came from initially. You know, our work is all about the child, and I absolutely 100% continue with that. But if we're not giving the right information to the parents at the right time and the carers, then they're never going to be able to support those children to the best of their abilities. And I think that's where that research came from and is now evolving. So yeah, I will look into that and see if it would meet any criteria and moving forward. So thank you.
Yeah, please do, Nicola. Parady's put the link to the document that Ben mentioned and also the email address to share potential case studies. So yeah, have a think, and we'd be really happy to explore that with you. Erin from Hertfordshire has joined. Welcome, Erin, who is going to talk us through the case study that Ben mentioned. So yeah, welcome, Erin, and
amazing, fab. All good if I share my slides? Yep.
Perfect.
Fab. Just give me 1 second.
Yeah, no rush, we can see in here. And again, we'll have time for question and answer at the end. So if you have a question, hold it until Erin has finished presenting and then we'll answer.
Fab, can you just confirm, Anna, that those slides have come up?
Yeah, I can see them and I can hear you fine. All good.
Amazing. Fab. Okay, good morning, everybody. My name is Erin Bradley. I'm a programme manager at Hertfordshire County Council within our children's services. And my main focus is on our SEND improvement journey. And I'm here today to present one aspect of it, essentially related to the case study that we have with what works in SEND. Hertfordshire, we've been on quite a long improvement journey since our inspection back in 2023, working really closely between the council, our ICB colleagues, our NHS providers, schools and settings. And it's been a real effort to get to where we are. But I'm here today to focus on one specific part, which is around our workforce transformation within the local authority, and essentially the drivers for that, what we've done as a result and some of the outcomes, and yeah, happy to take any questions at the end. So where we started on this improvement journey, if I think back to sort of 2023 times, round about inspection, just before inspection, we had a number of drivers for change in Hertfordshire related to our statutory SEND services. You can see on the screen there around, sort of 4 key stats that are probably might feel familiar to some other local areas on the call. Obviously, quite quite stark statistics there, but like most areas, dealing with a really rapid increase in requests for EHC needs assessments and the number of EHCPs, and essentially our workforce not being able to keep up with that pace. So very, very high caseloads for our staff. You can see there 450 to 550 when we've done modelling. Of course, not sustainable, not conducive to, you know, working well with families or schools or really delivering positive outcomes for young people. And you can see there in our timeliness and things and our retention. Yeah, really, really not where we needed it to be. And our leaders absolutely recognised that through our inspection, but also even before that, you know, we knew something needed to change, and we really came together as a partnership to work on that, and also from our political leaders, and really got that investment into the workforce. So by having the leaders on board and recognising we need to do something different, we've been able to achieve quite a lot of the aims I'm about to talk through in this presentation. I think one of the key things I just mentioned as well at the bottom of the slide there was that mismatch between our ILACS inspection, so our social care outcomes in Hertfordshire, and our SEND inspection. And, you know, of course, naturally the questions about why and what practice can we take from social care to improve our outcomes for SEND in Hertfordshire. In terms of the workforce transformation itself, we sort of had 4 key aims. So the strategic aim was around making SEND everyone's business, and that's actually the name of the workforce transformation programme that we have in place. So it's not about a sort of single point of failure. It's not about one team's responsibility. SEND and supporting children and people with SEND and their families, related to a comment just made in the previous presentation, is everybody's responsibility. So we are really trying to get that ethos embedded in Hertfordshire. Investing in the workforce, so it's not just about what can we do within the means we have. We have put significant investment in, over £7 million in the past couple of years. We're actually just about to invest further in our workforce, recognising that it needs that investment to really make a difference. Thinking about our quality assurance, so having a really robust quality assurance function for SEND, taking that some of that good practice from our social care services, and then youth voice. So within all of this and within our workforce and within, you know, our statutory SEND services, how is youth voice being captured? How is it central? Both at their individual support level, but also at that strategic level, helping shape our improvements. In terms of I guess what we did, the workforce transformation itself, the sort of 4 key things that were actioned. We have a new delivery model for statutory SEND services, and I'll talk about it on the next slide in a second, that essentially took the responsibilities for statutory SEND work, and we now have dedicated teams who are specifically tailored to support children with specific needs. So again, rather than having that sort of pressure point, single point of failure in statutory SEND, we have it spread out across, and it means that support is really tailored depending on the needs of the child, and I'll show that in the next slide. Really, really extensive recruitment campaign, so working really, really closely with our HR department. That investment allowed us to recruit over 100, it's actually probably over 140 now, additional staff. We had a real focus on lived experience of SEND, not looking to, I guess, number one, recognising that there is general workforce challenges in the SEND system, and, you know, we can't, if we're always looking for people that have all the technical knowledge and things there, we often struggle. So actually, can we recruit from a wider pool from our community and then train them up, which is exactly what we've tried to do. So the next box down, we've got our SEND Academy now, which is set up to provide induction and training. I'll talk a little bit about that later in the presentation. And then we also actually now have a dedicated SEND quality assurance team, so they support with the QA of our EHCPs, but also do thematic auditing as well. In terms of that delivery model I mentioned, I won't talk through this in depth, but I really just wanted to highlight that we essentially have completely changed the way that we deliver statutory SEND services. So we still have our assessment service, who of course deliver that EHC needs assessment up to the 20-week point. But when it comes to the annual review processing and the statutory casework around that, our responsibilities for that are now spread across different teams depending on the sort of age or needs of the child. So our early years, we have a school age stat SEND, access and inclusion, who support children who may be missing education or are electively home educated or in EOTAS packages, a virtual school for children looked after, and then services for young people who are absolute experts in post-16 and working closely with our colleges. And the aim of this was to be able to tailor the portfolio levels of EHCPs across the services. So for example, where school age stat SEND and services for young people are really focused on developing close relationships with the setting, so the schools and the colleges, our early years virtual school and access inclusion have slightly smaller portfolios because, for example, sometimes those children don't necessarily have the protection of a school or a parent carer. and therefore it's a little bit more intensive. So we've taken that tailored approach with the aim of, you can see the blue box on the right, around timeliness of annual reviews, the quality and the satisfaction. Send Academy, that's our branding. If you, some of you may have seen it before, because we have promoted this a little bit in the past, but again, one of the aims of the investment was to actually develop a completely new way of training and inducting our staff into our statutory SEND workforce, and our SEND Academy is the sort of branding that underneath that. What is the SEND Academy? So it's actually really evolved on as we've went through our improvement journey. It started as a way of inducting our new staff. So of course, if you have over 140 staff being recruited, they weren't all recruited at the same time. It was a phased approach, but you absolutely need to have a robust way of inducting them, because one of the key measures of success, of course, is can we then retain those staff and are they supported? It has actually evolved now to be more of a brand around our training approach in Hertfordshire, our continuous improvement. We have practice development leads, we have our children's services learning development team who are all involved in running this, and we are constantly learning from our quality assurance and practice findings about what training is needed for our staff. So it's now a continuous, but it's still used to induct new staff as well. The other way it's grown is originally starting from, we need a way of inducting and training our staff within the council, but everything we are doing in Hertfordshire with our continuous improvement journey, we are absolutely trying to do in partnership across our health partners and schools and settings. And the SEND Academy, we've now managed to grow it to actually be a true partnership training offer. So we have a website for it, a platform where we can host training events or materials and things. And you can see on the slide there just some of the examples of things that we've produced and published on there. We're actually now in a position as well where we're able to deliver training direct to schools. So we now have that sort of capacity to do so. Good examples of that are where we're alongside the workforce transformation, we're doing transformation around our annual review processes, introducing new systems, and we want to make sure we have that offer to schools and settings around these are the changes that are happening, and providing training on that. So it's been a real opportunity to bring the partnership together on our training, our learning, sharing best practice, and actually we've got aims and ambitions to sort of continue to grow that and expand that moving forward. And actually, really, just at the bottom, I really want to highlight one of the sort of real positive experience of setting up the SEND Academy has been setting up our SEND Learning Week. So we now have a dedicated week, typically in October, where we bring the partnership together for a series of learning events across the week on a particular topic. So whether that's preparing for adulthood or children and young people's voice. And again, it's been a really, really good way of getting staff who may not necessarily work next to each other in the office or see each other day to day, but absolutely, you know, are all wrapped around that child and family, being able to bring them together and share good practice, and yeah, been really, really positive. And we're actually at the point now that we've commercialised our SEND Academy offer, so it has been purchased by 2 county councils. So recognising that, yeah, I think there has been a need in the system for a sort of robust induction and training approach to SEND, where, you know, as I said, we'd taken the approach of we want to welcome the community in. It's all about transferable skills. It's not necessarily staff who have the experience before, but you know, you need that approach. And I think that's been of real interest to some other local areas. So we've had some real success in that, and we're always happy to share the sort of what we've learned and what we're doing in Hertfordshire. Won't talk through this in absolute detail, but we are always keen, wherever possible, in our continuous improvement journey, that we're constantly assessing the impact and evaluating the difference things are making with our series of interventions. And one of the great things we've done is get an external evaluation commissioned of the SEND Academy itself, to understand if it really has had the impact that we intended. And the next couple of slides essentially go through that. So we could see from the evidence that staff are reporting, you know, there's an enhanced understanding of process. They feel that they have the right skills and tools to enable them to do the job. We've also seen an increase in the quality and writing of plans, and staff overall feeling like they have more confidence of being valued, and also manager confidence as well. Don't get me wrong, we absolutely still are on that continuous improvement journey. There's still things that we need to work on, but it was really, really positive to see that has had that impact on those staff. And the next slide is actually just some quotes from them, really, from some of the cohorts from the SEND Academy, which is, yeah, really positive. The photo there is just an example of, yeah, one of the trainings. I think one of the biggest things is the logistics around this. It's a real testament to our learning development teams. Our service leads who often are delivering the training in the SEND Academy alongside their day-to-day job. And also our SEND quality assurance team, they all wrap around this SEND Academy and really make it work well. One of the things I mentioned in terms of what we've done is around our quality assurance approach. So on the left-hand side there is essentially the four main aspects of this new approach and what we're doing. If I think back to sort of 2023 and sort of around our inspection when we were really starting this improvement journey, I think it's probably safe to say quality assurance wasn't not a priority, but there wasn't a clear method in which we did that, which was a real juxtaposition with our social care. So I mentioned about ILACs and our quality assurance coming across there really, really strong. So we wanted to take learning from that and adapt it for SEND. And one of the ways we've done that is invest in a dedicated SEND quality assurance team, but they actually sit in the same service as our social care team. So they're able to, as they've been evolving and developing their team, they've been able to work hand in hand with social care and really learn what works and what doesn't, which has been really, really positive. And some of the other aspects that we've done alongside that, we've developed a multi-agency SEND quality assurance framework. We're quite clear in Hertfordshire that when we're talking about quality assurance, it's not just about the quality of HCPs. I know that, of course, in our local area, it's one of our improvement areas. I'm sure it's an improvement area for many local areas up and down the country, but quality of services is more than just that EHCP. It's about the whole experience of a service, and we wanted that to come across really strongly in our quality assurance approach in Hertfordshire. So that multi-agency QA framework is about there's 10 principal quality within it, and it is about assessing services, essentially assessing against those and how they meet those, not just for HCPs and quality, but actually just their general service delivery. And to enable us to essentially check that we are meeting those and assure ourselves and provide that scrutiny, we've actually set up a permanent SEND quality assurance board, and it is multi-agency, parent care representation, school representation, and reps across our services, and it is co-chaired by the council and by the integrated care board. So there's that real partnership working. It's been really, really positive for bringing different partners together where they may not necessarily have in-depth knowledge of how different services work, and bring them together to share that practice, develop their understanding of each other's services has been really, really positive. It absolutely takes effort. So, you know, alongside all our improvement work, setting up improvement boards, etc., putting this board in place has absolutely you know, it's been an effort, but it's absolutely been worth it. And as I say, it's permanent. It's something we want to continue. This isn't for the life cycle of an improvement plan or a SEND strategy. It's something we want to continue as a business as usual way of working moving forward. And actually some of the benefits of having that real focus on QA through a board and the framework is that other services have been coming on board where maybe necessarily they weren't before. Some sort of universal services have been coming to our QA board and talking about how they are meeting 10 principal quality for SEND. So it's been really, really positive. And the integrated care board themselves actually have been able to lead on peer-to-peer SEND quality visits across NHS providers, again, and specialist services or universal services where that sort of mechanism just didn't exist 2 years ago. So we've really stepped up our activity on this. It was something that was recognised, I've just put in the box at the bottom, but recognised as a strong approach from our through our monitor inspection. And reason being, it was a real focus for us and through the previous SEND inspection. So one of our priority actions was actually around our collaboration and our approach to quality assurance. So we had to make sure we focused on it. And the sort of final box that I'd mentioned in terms of the work that we've been doing is around our youth voice. So absolutely central to all the work we do. And again, the sort of theme here, knowing that we need to invest to make a difference. And we actually have recruited a SEND participation lead in Hertfordshire who works across the partnership. And the post holders worked really, really diligently to develop a coherent model of what is Young People Voice, Young People Co-production Hertfordshire, what does it mean, both at the individual level and that strategic level. So we have a sort of branded model now called Voices of Hertfordshire that articulates how at the strategic level, for example, you can see on the slide there, we have our experts by experience, we have our supported interns, we have youth councils who are working with us on a really regular basis around topics of SEND, service improvement, shaping services. But then also at that individual level, what are we doing? And actually one of the key ways is on the slide there, you can see the This Is Me form. So being co-produced with young people, co-produced with our parent carer from HPCI and our services, but with a real focus on how do we improve the quality of young people's voice coming through in their EHCPs, but it's actually being used more widely now in other types of plans across the partnership. And again, been really, really positive for seeing improvements in the quality of young people's voice coming through in plans. I think overall, it's a part of the work that has been a real joy to watch sort of grow and develop. I've had the pleasure myself of actually working with experts by experience and our supported interns, and it is always the most fun part of the job, getting to hear what they say and you know, their views quite honestly, with, you know, no beating around the bush, and it's about how we work with them, take that, and also communicate back to them. I think that's something we're really trying to strengthen at the moment around, you know, the relationship we have with young people around co-production and voice. It can't just be take. We're not just trying to take feedback from them, work with them. It's about how we feedback about what difference the work they are doing has made. So that's a real focus sort of over this next year. So with all of that in mind, I've sort of talked through sort of 4 different elements of our workforce transformation, a little bit on the end here about what sort of outcomes this has helped us achieve. We have seen massive improvements in our staff retention. So I think you'll see, remember way at the start, it's 44% for our statutory SEND staff, essentially our plan holding staff. That has reduced over the last couple of years to 24%. Absolutely, still not exactly where we want it to be, and we absolutely do still have challenges around that, but vastly improved. And we've actually now stood up a SEND workforce board to continue, I guess, that focus on staff retention, well-being, recruitment to see what further improvements we can make. Plan holding is down, so you know, our staff again still not probably the levels that you, if you asked an ECHO, are ideal for being able to, you know, do everything that they want to, but vastly reduced. So you would see they were up in the 400s, 500s. We're now down in the sort of average 180s, 170s. So been really positive. And again, I'd mentioned before the sort of positive feedback around the SEND Academy from our staff. So we're now in the process of regularly sort of surveying and sense checking with our staff around how they're feeling, the well-being, do they feel supported, etc. And that's all sort of continuing priorities of our workforce board. And in terms of outcomes for children and young people, so left-hand side there, these were the sort of aims when we started this workforce transformation around making sure that children are receiving higher quality plans so that their needs are better detailed, the support is better detailed. They're receiving timelier plans so they can get timelier support, and the general experience and satisfaction for young people and families improves, and their voice as well. And you can see in the middle there some of the stats. So when we started this journey and we started our sort of quality improvement of EHCPs, we were down at 5% rated good or better through our auditing processes. That's now up at 72% for new plans. So we've seen every quarter improvements. That still means there's some that aren't quite there, and that's where we are absolutely still on that journey. So it's not that we've done everything and we can tick the box so that work's done. We're on that journey still, but really, really positive to see. Our 20-week timeliness, again, we've managed to work really, really hard on our assessment team, the recruitment there. They have a really stable team, really well, you know, sort of receive a lot of training and support, and they've really done an amazing job around their processes, but also how they work with speech and language therapy, for example, or educational psychologists, etc., all around that 20-week. How can we make that as efficient as possible? And we're actually now up over 90% for our 20-week timeliness in December. It's been over 80% actually since September itself, so we're starting to see that stabilisation. Complaints are down. Again, still probably not exactly where we want them, but we have seen that fall in complaints, and we are sort of every quarter doing satisfaction surveys and calls to families to understand a little bit more about their experiences of their EHCP processes. And again, that's showing that we're little by little that satisfaction is improving, and probably most notably related to our communications, where we know that's a key pain point for families, absolutely, where if you're not getting a response, or the response isn't in the way that you would expect. We've tried really hard in Hertfordshire to focus on that accurate, compassionate and timely, and that's actually a framework that HPCI, or Parent Care Reform, worked with us on. That sort of reduction in complaints and increase in compliments, really focusing on the communications there and how that's impacted that. But absolutely still on a journey. And then I'd mentioned previously about the quality of Section A and how that's improved through the work we've done around the This Is Me form. So some really positives there, but I guess I just want to end in saying our improvement journey absolutely continues. It is by no means done. We are expecting our inspection at some point later this year. We had our monitor inspection a few months ago, which showed that we have taken effective action, but absolutely recognise that for some families and schools and settings, the experience still isn't consistent and we still have work to do. So absolutely recognise that, and the work has not stopped, the pace has not stopped. And probably for a lot of people on the call, the challenges on this slide resonate with all of you. We are still dealing with the sort of funding challenges. The size of Hertfordshire, we have over 530 schools in Hertfordshire, so any improvement work we're doing around inclusion or anything, that's always going to be a challenge when you're dealing with such a large county. And actually our political leaders as well, when it comes to our workforce, have recognised that actually just to keep pace with the increasing needs that we're seeing, we need to invest even more. So that's actually a process we're going through at the moment around getting even more resource to put in our statutory SEND services. And yeah, just I think my final thought is really to highlight, as much as I've focused on the sort of workforce element from a local authority perspective today, all the improvement work we're doing in Hertfordshire is absolutely done in partnership. There's nothing that we are doing that we couldn't do without education, health and social care all being round the table. It has been absolutely fundamental to the work that we're doing, and yeah, hope that continues. So yeah, I'll stop there. I'm happy to take any questions or feedback. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Erin. So much work, and you can really see the impact of that. And I get the sense that you are an excellent programme manager who is always pushing people to, we're doing great, but we can do better. That comes across really strongly. But yeah, I think just pause and reflect on the great work that you have been doing, because there's loads in there. We do have time for a couple of questions. There was one in the chat, so I'll read that out, and if anyone else has one, do pop your hand up. So I'll read Kate's from the chat first, and then I'll come to you, Penny. Kate asked, how do the ICB quality visits to health teams work?
Oh, very good question. I will caveat this by saying I'm not the expert in those ICB quality visits. I actually work with a colleague in our ICB quality team who we actually run the QA board together. So she sort of sets up all those quality visits. What I can say is they are done in a peer-to-peer way. So the ICB is very much sort of coordinator within that. So for example, within Hertfordshire, we have sort of 3 main providers: Hertfordshire Community Trust, East and North Herts Trust, HPFT, and they've been sort of coordinating different services, doing peer-to-peer work between different organisations and different services. So they've done it in that way. They've organised a sort of audit tool that is around our 10 principles of quality. I didn't have those on the slides, but they're the things you'd expect around ease of access, communications, turning on people's voice, etc. So the visit is very much designed to explore in that way. They then produce a report after it with recommendations, and that's what comes through our quality assurance board. And then we try and do a sort of closing the loop activity where potentially 6 to 12 months later, that service or organisation will come back and update us on the work that they've done off the back of that. So that's a very local authority officer answer. Apologies, because I'm not the expert. But what I can do, Kate, is if you give me your email address, I can actually put you in touch with our ICB colleague and their quality team, because if you want more information, I'm sure they'd be happy to share it.
Erin, that's great. Yes, okay, pop your email address in the chat if that sounds like something that would be really helpful. Penny, what's your question?
Oh, I think you're on mute still.
There we go.
You
Teams
go.
is not our friend today. We can hear you.
New laptop. Thank you. It's so good to hear everything that's happening in Hertfordshire. Erin, you made a couple of references to schools. So what you said right at the beginning that we couldn't achieve what we've achieved or secured the enduring impact for families if we didn't do it with schools. And then you talked about the work you've done with schools, after the EHP was finalised, and ongoing monitoring and review. I always find when I'm listening to reports back about improvement work, that it feels to me like there's an imbalance between references to parents, our work with parents and carers and building confidence there, and our utter reliance on the schools and services to deliver education for children. Now, you talked about improving workforce, but you didn't talk about relationships with schools, and I'd be particularly interested in relations between schools, because I know that in time gone by, the notion of schools working together in districts was sort of fundamental to sharing accountability. So I just wondered, I suppose, about that school-to-school relationship and what you've done to strengthen that delivery partnership over and above what you've told us about.
Yep, okay. I will start by actually just mentioning, related to our workforce to schools, and then I'll talk about schools to schools. One of the benefits of the delivery model we now have, and I can see somebody's asked in the chat about the 6 new services. So having a school age statutory send service, they are really focused on building their relationships with schools. So the way we've done that is through a link echo model. So all our schools have a link echo to provide that consistent point of contact. They have regular kit meetings with that echo, and that's really supported us building that relationship with individual schools. We base the frequency of those on the number of EHCPs each school has. So for example, you'd imagine special schools, they're getting more frequent kit meetings with their echo. Schools who maybe have a few less, maybe it's termly or half termly, etc. So that's been a really key way of us building our relationships with schools and our echoes. Don't get me wrong, it's still not perfect. We know in instances potentially maybe where we have echo turnover or things like that, we've still got work to do on that bit around turnover. But that's one of the things that's really helped us build our relationships with schools. In terms of school to school, I would say in Hertfordshire we have a really strong system of consortia across Hertfordshire. So our secondary consortia, our primary heads consortia, and our special school consortia. And actually the chairs of all of those sit on our SEND governance. So they're part of our partnership boards, they're part of our SEND executive. And that is a really crucial way that we involve the voices of all schools on our improvement work, because they provide that conduit and mechanism, but also getting those key messages out there. So where we are, for example, at the moment, we're really focused on mainstream inclusion and how we develop that inclusive culture and ethos across Hertfordshire. You know, we need those consortia to work with us and, you know, send out those key messages. So that's been working really, really well. But then at the local level, we also have a system in Hertfordshire called DSPLs, delivering specialist provision locally, split across 9 areas, and they are essentially run by the schools in that area. It's a way of doing a bit of local commissioning, essentially, around whether it's they want to focus on reduced timetables or exclusions, etc. And they're actually pretty much run by the schools they have a DSPL manager. And again, it's another really example of how the schools in that local area are talking about what they need, and you know. So there's a few different things we're doing. As I say, the vastness of Hertfordshire means that nothing's, you know, doing it on a county-wide level is not possible. We're really focused on, you know, that local, and actually that will become more and more important with local government reform, you know, because inevitably Hertfordshire is the size of it as won't exist. So yeah, there's a few mechanisms, but I would say it's, in terms of SEND improvement and feeding up to that governance, ensuring that the chairs of our local consortia are fully involved in our SEND governance is absolutely crucial to that improvement work and building those relationships.
Thank you, Erin. I would love to talk more, but not today.
Yeah, I really don't want us to run out of time for our next presentation, but before I forget, Penny, we do have a case study, I think, from Manchester, and that's around clusters of special schools, so that might be an interesting one for you to look at as well. And thanks for that really thorough answer to Erin. So just say that big thank you to Erin. That was really helpful, and we are sharing slides, I think, and obviously there's a recording, so if you want to listen back to any of the really great stuff in there. So thank you so much, Erin.
No problem. Thanks, everybody.
Parady, our CDC colleague, is going to join and tell us about North Tyneside. Hello, Parady.
Morning, everyone. Thanks, Anna. Morning. So my name's Parady Baptiste. I'm the SEND Stakeholder and Evidence Lead at the Council for Disabled Children. So I lead on the Effective Practice Evidence Framework with Ben, who you heard from earlier, and other ISOS partnership colleagues. So today I'm sharing North Tyneside's Early Years Partnership, which is a joined up model for supporting disabled children and those with special educational needs under 5. I'll cover the local background, drivers for change, the core aims the partnership set out to achieve, the actions that made the difference, and the impact for children, families, and practitioners. And just a quick note to say that when referring to children under 5, I'm referring to children who have not yet entered reception year. And just for ease, I'll use the term children with SEND when discussing disabled children and children with special educational needs. So why was the work undertaken? So although North Tyneside's previous early years pathways were working well, the system as a whole wasn't working as well as it could for children and families or practitioners. So the early years partnership emerged as a response to several challenges affecting children under 5 with special educational needs and disabilities. Now, many children were entering reception year with unassessed or unmet needs, and with some who are unknown to services that could have supported them, which in some cases was because children did not attend an early year setting prior to starting reception year. Families were navigating a complex system with multiple entry points into support pathways, resulting in duplicate referrals and having to repeat their story numerous times. And at the same time, professionals were working within disconnected data systems, preventing efficient information sharing. Now, this was happening against the backdrop of rising requests for education, health and care needs assessments and a growing proportion of education, health and care plans issued for children under 5, signalling increasing pressure on statutory processes. Now, in North Tyneside, local strategic priorities, including a commitment to becoming a family-friendly and caring authority, underscore the importance of creating a simpler, more transparent support journey for families. So North Tyneside recognised that despite a strong collaborative ethos across the local area, early years pathways remain disjointed and that early intervention, workforce capability and cross-agency alignment were essential to delivering better experiences and outcomes. So essentially this drove the need for a system-wide realignment through the early years partnership, built in co-production and designed to create a more coherent, integrated approach to supporting children under 5 with SEND, with a commitment to ensuring that no child reach reception age without their needs being recognised and supported. So the early years partnership was established with 3 core aims designed to strengthen outcomes for children under 5 with SEND and improve the system that supports them. And now the first aim was centred around strengthening early pre-statutory support by identifying needs earlier and providing clear signposting to universal and targeted provision. The second aim focused on transforming the experiences of parents and carers by simplifying the support system, reducing duplication, and improving communication. And this included providing families with clearer explanations of how their children were being supported, as well as equipping them with strategies to use in the home environment. And lastly, the third aim centred on improving children's lived experiences and longer-term outcomes by enhancing staff confidence and expertise across early years settings. Training and modelling were intended to build practitioners' capacity to deliver inclusive practice. And collectively, these aims provided a framework for a more coherent, integrated and family-centred support system. So to understand how North Tyneside achieved their aims, what were the key actions and effective practices that shaped the project? So North Tyneside Council placed co-production at the centre of developing the early years partnership, establishing a collaborative model that intentionally integrated the voices and expertise of parents, carers, education professionals, health partners and social care representatives. The formation of a steering group ensured that strategic direction was consistently informed by lived experience and professional insight, whilst themed working groups enabled focused development of specific system components. Now, this iterative approach allowed the model to adapt responsively based on feedback, with the Parent Carer Forum acting as a critical friend, helping to refine processes, challenge assumptions, and ensure the final pathway aligned with family needs. So in addition to shaping the initial design, co-production became an ongoing mechanism for strengthening practice. multi-agency initiatives such as the Occupational Therapy Toolkit focus on functional skills and parental engagement, reinforce shared ownership and service alignment. Partnership working between 0 to 19 public health service, between the 0 to 19 public health service and speech and language therapy service, enabled delivery of chatbot strategies to ensure early years practitioners to early years practitioners demonstrated integrated working to support children and families where speech and language delay was identified at the 2-year check. So these sustained collaborative efforts ensured that the Early Years Partnership operated not only as a redesigned system, but as a multi-agency culture centred on improving outcomes for children under 5. By embedding co-production throughout development, implementation and ongoing improvement, North Tyneside Council ensured that the Early Years Partnership was not only comprehensive, but also trusted, inclusive and aligned with the realities facing families and practitioners. So this kind of describes the kind of single referral route and one front door. So the defining feature of the Early Years Partnership was the alignment of 6 services, allowing multidisciplinary expertise to be shared effectively. And the 6 services that make up the Early Years Partnership are the Early Years Communication Outreach Team, Portage and Preschool Home Teaching Service, Sensory Support Service, Educational Psychology Service, the Primary Outreach Service for Under 5s, and the Early Years Inclusion Service. And this alignment provides a single coordinated pathway for families, kind of reducing that confusion and ensuring that children's needs are understood collectively rather than in isolation by different services. Now, the Early Years Child Alert functions as a single front door for any child aged 0 to 5 who may require additional support at home or in earlier settings, providing a streamlined referral mechanism for parents, carers, early years providers, schools and wider partners. And this universal accessibility ensures that emerging concerns can be raised by those closest to the child, improving early identification and intervention. Now, early years child alert and health notification referrals are reviewed and triaged through weekly panel reviews led by the Early Years Partnership. And this also includes multi-agency representation from Early Health and the 0 to 19 Public Health Service. And this approach enables triangulation of information and ensures well-informed and more holistic decision-making. Now, the panel determines one of 3 pathways. So the universal and local offer, targeted or statutory support. And this ensures children kind of access the right support at the right time. And to maintain continuity of support, if an education, health and care needs assessment request is declined, children are actually stepped down into the partnership who put in place a coordinated SEND support offer. Now, to ensure parents and carers have a clear understanding of how their child's needs are actually being supported, key workers from the Early Years Partnership work closely with families to explain decisions, coordinate support, and evaluate the impact of interventions. Now, they hold meetings with parents, carers and settings before any intervention begins, and they also work with early years practitioners and families to review the impacts of each intervention and plan next steps. Now, all requests for early years inclusion funding are also processed through the Early Years Child Alert system, and that's for consistent oversight. And streamlining early years inclusion funding applications through the Child Alert ensures North Tyneside can understand the full context of a child's needs and, where necessary, commission bespoke whole setting interventions or training from the Early Years Partnership. Now, after targeted work has been delivered and evaluated, the Early Years Partnership can also recommend renewed or continued funding. And this combination of clear processes, accessible support routes and integrated funding decisions strengthen North Tyneside's early years SEND pathway, enabling earlier support and promoting consistent inclusive practice across settings. So North Tyneside invested approximately 465,000 to establish the Early Years Inclusion Service, designed to enhance support for children aged 0 to 5 with emerging or identified SEN. Now, the service was co-produced through workshops and consultations with parents, early years providers, primary schools and health partners, ensuring that its design reflected both family needs and frontline professional experience. It operates through a locality-based model, and through this, the Early Years Inclusion Service fosters strong relationships between practitioners, settings, enabling consistent support. Early years SENCOs within the service are responsible for assessing needs, and early years inclusion outreach workers support transitions into early years settings, provide modelling and coaching of interventions within homes and early years settings, and help to evaluate their effectiveness. Now, by establishing the Early Years Inclusion Service, North Tyneside strengthened its capacity to provide high quality early intervention, ensuring that children receive that coordinated support and ultimately building a more inclusive early years system aligned with local strategic priorities. So to improve consistency and accessibility of support across early year settings, North Tyneside Council refreshed and strengthened its graduated offer, introducing a graduated approach toolkit to guide practitioners through the process of identifying needs, applying evidence-based strategies and accessing appropriate support. They integrated the Early Years Child Alert system within this to provide a clearer pathway for universal targeted and statutory support. And universal services were enhanced through the introduction of early years sensor surgeries, which are regular advisory sessions, enabling early years settings and schools to seek guidance on emerging needs, as well as the Early Years Duty Helpline, which offers direct access to advice for parents and early years staff from the Early Years Inclusion Service. So North Tyneside recognised that sustainable improvement in early years SEN support relies on a confident, well-trained workforce. So to achieve this, the partnership developed a comprehensive co-produced training programme addressing key areas of practice, including adapting for autism, autism in the early years, mastering the graduated approach and navigating transitions. And this training package was designed with input from parents, practitioners and professionals across education, health and care. To improve accessibility, twilight sessions were also introduced, allowing staff who were unable to attend daytime sessions to participate fully. And the early years setting alert mechanism provides a route for settings to request bespoke whole setting training where emerging patterns of needs are identified. And those early years settings alert requests can be submitted by SENCOs or a member of the early years partnership working with the setting. If members of the Early Years Partnership are aware of a setting that requires additional support, they can also recommend this to the setting. Now, this offer includes training from the EYSEN Training and Network Directory, as well as bespoke training designed to meet the needs of a particular setting. The Educational Psychology Service also offers bespoke training, coaching and consultation sessions, and their support offer includes team around the setting, video interactive guidance, and attachment and trauma-informed play approaches, alongside individual and group coaching. North Tyneside also set up a dedicated intervention space located within one of their family hubs, and this is designed as a model nursery and offers practitioners opportunities to observe best practice, receive live modelling and practice strategies before applying them in their own settings.
Parady, we only have about 30 seconds left, so maybe if we could wrap up, and we'll not do questions, but if you have a question, pop it in the chat and we'll answer it after the session.
No problem. So the partnership demonstrated clear impact in strengthening early support pathways. More than 340 early years child alert referrals were triaged through the partnership, and almost all were met through universal or targeted support, with just one progressing to statutory. And this indicates a more effective graduated response, meeting needs earlier and more proportionately. Families reported significant improvements in their experience of the system, describing a stronger sense of being heard, understood and supported. And parents highlighted the importance of having a key professional who coordinated support and ensured continuity, reducing stress and making transitions much smoother. And lastly, practitioners who received training reported 81% kind of positive impact on knowledge and understanding, highlighting tangible shifts from using visual supports and structured play for self-regulation to adopting strategies like bucket time to develop shared attention. And finally, these voices collectively demonstrate the success of the partnership in building trust, improving families and practitioners' confidence to best support children under 5.
Thank you so much, Parady, and sorry for making you rush through that last one. I know people will have to drop off. I'm sure you have another meeting to go to, so we will be sharing slides and the link to the recording. If you have a question specific to North Tyneside, do pop it in the chat and we'll answer that in the email that you get following this session with the slides. There is a link to tell us what you think of the webinars. Please do, because we are hoping to be able to do more of these next year, and we'd really like to know what it is that you find really useful about them so that we can do more of that. I'll just say thank you again to Ben, to Erin and to Parady, because that was all so much information and delivered in a really interesting way. So thank you for spending your time with us this morning, and to everyone that's still on the call, thank you. We will be in touch with slides and links to the recording. Oh, Michael, if you have a question, you've got, well, carry on.
No, it was an accident. It was meant to be a thumbs up.
Ah,
Instead, it was a hand
excellent.
up. Got it all wrong.
Don't worry. Lovely to see you all. We'll end the call now, and hopefully see you at more of these sessions in the next few months.